Konnichiwa.
Welcome to the Jandals in Japan podcast.
Kia ora, Catherine.
Konnichiwa, Jane.
We are into February and it's all go with connections between Japan and New Zealand. What is happening?
Sure is. Oh, goodness me. We've had the Chiefs and the Blues have just been here playing amazing games with Japan local teams as well. This global thing, global but local coming together. Amazing. So we've got the two teams and those regions from New Zealand in the sports arena and in Japan today creating waves.
Yeah, and today we're going to be talking about technology between Japan and New Zealand. And I've always had a bit of a sort of a block around this thinking, oh, but Japan is in Japanese, so technology wouldn't translate, right? Like all these sort of, for example, software as a service, right? SaaS or whatever they call it. English software trying to come to Japan, you couldn't do that. Well, that's not true at all. I turned on a new Slack channel recently to find it was in Japanese, for example, and Slack is usable in Japanese these days. It's like,
brilliant.
Yeah.
And you know, on Slack the other day, I did a video call with people in Europe.
Yes,
so Slack
huddle, right?
has a video. Yeah, huddle. It was awesome.
We huddled. There's good rugby terminology
huddle.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
so,
I mean, we also talk about startups, don't we, in this episode, because Fukuoka and Auckland are sister cities and they're connecting on a lot of that through their sort of hubs that they have in both cities. And that's awesome because this is a great episode. You're going to love it if you love tech, startups. There's also there's a really great story that this guest tells about a little faux pas that happened.
Yeah.
And I think part of Japan is we learn from our falls. We learn from those things where we've tripped up, done a little faux pas, and we've listened to somebody who's told us, oh, this is how you do it in Japan, but it may not be quite right. So we maybe should verify some of our stories. Yeah, and make sure we're doing it right. But at the same time, we can learn from these little trip ups. But don't let it destroy your passion and love for Japan, as it didn't with this guest.
Yeah,
this incident led her to love it. Yeah, so let's get with it. I have to tell you who it is, though, Jane.
Yeah. Who is this? Who is this mystery guest?
Yeah, we're talking with Pam, and Pam is Director of Economic Development at Tātaki Auckland Unlimited. And she's also been with NZTE in the past. She's amazing. We met her when we were at Beppu. And it's just so timely that this is coming out right when we've had Auckland in the forefront with the Blues and other things happening here as we bring this episode to you.
Yeah, let's hear it from Pam. Kia ora, Pam. Welcome to the Jandals in Japan podcast. Great to have you on the show today.
Kia ora, Jane, and kia ora, Catherine. It's a real pleasure to join you both.
So we like to start off with a warm-up question. And for you, the question is, tell us one of your favorite things about Fukuoka.
Well, Fukuoka, first time I went there was last November. I loved the big mall at the train station, and I found some amazing places to eat up on the top layers there. So it was a real treat every lunchtime and dinner choosing which place to go to in that big food hall at the top of the station. It was fun. Having not been in Japan for some time, I was just taking every moment to enjoy the food.
Yeah, that's a good thing to remember, isn't it? If you're looking for restaurants and you find a big shopping building thing like that, they're probably on the top floor, aren't they, Catherine, generally?
Yeah, generally on the top floor, yes.
The top floors. Or maybe in the very bottom floors, but not so much in the middle. So you can usually find good places to eat there. Have you been to Fukuoka, Catherine? I haven't.
I've gone through. So I've got off at other places around Kyushu, but I haven't actually been to Fukuoka and spent some time there. Well, we know that you also learnt Japanese earlier in your days at Waikato, and you've had a range of roles in your career so far, international trade, investment and local development for I think more than 20 years, which is great, and including NZTE tucked in there somewhere. Wow, I didn't realize that before you sent your bio over, so that's very interesting. And now you're in charge of Tātaki Auckland Unlimited. Used to be ATED, right? ATEED. So we're super happy to have you on the podcast today. We met you exactly a year ago at Beppu for the Japan New Zealand Business Council conference that was held there. And we were so keen to have you back. Finally, 1 year anniversary, you are on the show. And we'll be putting your full bio into the show notes a bit later. But tell us about your background there in New Zealand, Pam, and what led you to study Japanese and then come to Japan on your first visit?
My interest in Japan started probably my last year of primary school, and my dad visited Japan for business. So he was in the meat business, and this was in the late 70s. And, Japan was a big place of interest at that time. So I still remember the postcard that he sent with the Tokyo Tower on it, and the hoodie that he bought me with Snoopy, and it was so cool. And I could wear it to netball, and I was, like the cool kid, which didn't really happen very often. But having this clothing from Japan, and my brother had this really cool baseball jacket with bright orange and black, might have been from Yokohama. So Japan got into my psyche at that point in time, and while my school didn't teach Japanese, I had this burning desire to be able to work in Japan and do marketing in Japan, like my dad had done. So it's a common story, I think, amongst many of us who fell in love with Japan as youngsters. So at the end of school, I went to the University of Waikato and did BMS, Business Management, and majored in Japanese and marketing. And in fact, Tony Boot, who I think many people know, obviously Jayne and Catherine, you know Tony very well, he was my tutor in Japanese. So
really?
yeah. So if
go.
anyone asks me, do I speak Japanese now, it's a very clear Sukoti desu ka. Long time ago. I was lucky enough, though, to be able to go over for 3 months during the university holiday. That was over the 1986, 87, this time of year, November to February. So the way I was able to go was, again, back to my dad, was doing business with a Japanese businessman. And this businessman was, his main piece of work was creating casings for sausages, would you believe? And so he would get all his meat from New Zealand. And I think he had multiple interests. And he invited me to come over for that 3 months. And I would go to a language school in the mornings in Shibuya, and then jump on the train on the Yamanote line to go to Shinjuku for work in this company. So it was, oh my gosh, it blew my mind. I mean, I was 20-year-old from Cambridge, pretty naive, very naive as it turned out. There was an incident at the end, which we'll probably get onto at some point. But gosh, being thrust into Tokyo, it was amazing, and I totally loved it. And Japan really has held a fascination, fondness, love ever since.
So when were you in Tokyo? Was this, did you say the 80s?
86.
Right. So that Tokyo that we know today, and when you were here recently to the 86 Tokyo, must have been quite a different experience for you, with no Google Translate and very little English around compared to what there is today.
Yeah, exactly. And I was living in a hostel for female students, and we all had our own room, and there was only myself and one Indian girl. The rest were Japanese students, and everybody kept to themselves. So it was very isolated. I'd listen to the radio. You know how they have the US Army had a radio station? I don't know if they still do. They probably do. And Whitney Houston was big at that time. And I remember having a Whitney Houston tape or cassette or whatever it was. I listened to a lot of Whitney Houston in amongst trying to learn my Japanese by watching the game shows. So
it's a good way to learn, right? Japanese. I mean, I used to read it off the subtitles of the Japan movies that came into New Zealand and grab any opportunity. Listening to music is really a great way to learn Japanese.
Yeah, for sure.
TV. Wow. What is that incident? You got to tell us. What's the naivety that you had back then?
Look, I'm sure we've all been through it, but I lost faith for my host family by doing something that I didn't realise I was doing wrong, which was in this hostel, you were meant to be home every night by 10 p.m., which had not been an issue for me at all. And one Sunday I went out exploring as I would do, and I met this lady at one of the stations. And I was obviously looking at one of those guidebooks, Jane, certainly not into a phone or Google Maps. And so she came up to me and said, "Can I help you?" She was American. And it turned out that her and her husband had a house up in the Northland. He worked in a big insurance company in Tokyo. And so she said, "Let me take you out for the day." And I thought, well, this is fantastic, because I hadn't been speaking English for, nearly 2.5 months by that point. So we went out for the day, and then she took me back to her apartment to cook me dinner, which was not far from where I lived in Fukuoka. And I ended up getting home at about midnight. And I thought that was fine. And funnily enough, just the day before, I had asked the Indian girl that was living in the hostel, "What happens if you get home late?" And she said, "It's not a problem. You just go and apologise to the caretakers the next morning in case they've been worried about you." So this was a Sunday night, and the following Monday, the Monday morning, I got a phone call from the businessman who was my host family. He was quite a scary man, and he said, you were out late last night. When you come to work, we need to talk." So I was very scared, and I went to school, and my beautiful teacher, she was from Yokohama, so I'm really nervous about this, and went to work. He took me aside. He said, "You're going home on the next plane. No questions asked." And they couldn't get me on a flight for a week. So I had this week of just feeling absolutely terrible. And I bought gifts to take round to the family towards the end of that week. No one spoke to me from that point on. And they had 2 daughters, and one in particular who'd been looking after me, taking me on trips and stuff. I went to the door, and the lovely wife opened the door and then shut the door in my face. So it was an incredibly confronting experience for me, who was this, young girl from Cambridge, as I said, wasn't used to doing things wrong. And I was really embarrassed for my father, who had to do business with this man, and it really knocked my confidence in my Japanese. And I certainly struggled the following year, which was my last year in the language. And I remember having an interview with Air New Zealand at the end of my university time, and it was when they had those graduate programs, and they'd take 6 people, and they got down to the last 10. And I didn't get into the last 6, and the feedback from one of the interviews was that when they asked me about my experience in Japan, I didn't talk very much about it. So it really did stick with me for a long time. So it was unfortunate, but a very good lesson. Very good lesson.
Yes, me. Wow,
Yeah.
I'm stunned.
Yeah.
But what, Catherine, what do you
Same,
think?
stunned,
Yeah.
and think so many things that could have happened. Like, they could have contacted the American people and got a little insight there, or if we, in this day and age, you can text to tell people you're going to be late, and so much of that was just, as you were speaking, I was thinking that, but also thinking how horrible for them to have judged you on that one thing and not really go into asking you what happened or where you were. Maybe they did, but nothing mattered, and that they would just dismiss you. I feel that's probably someone who's a little bit maybe out of the box compared to what most Japanese would do. But I'm having this is a bit of a shock to hear that.
I do see Japan, as a country of paradoxes, and certainly my experience was that, and the family also, so very successful. They had a child who was disabled and couldn't talk and couldn't eat, and so she was hidden away. Working with the company, again, it was that interesting aspect that many people have gone through. We'd work all day, and then it was coming up to Christmas, so we went out one evening to a bar. And that was my first experience of a woman just sit back, and this is a long time ago, obviously, sit back and just observe, and the men are served. And that was a very interesting experience for me as well, having never ever seen that kind of distinction between men and women before. I have to say I saw that a lot in the rest of my 20s working in New Zealand and industry, but that was kind of my first experience. So, yeah, it was a fascinating time, and I just am very thankful for the experience I had, and it certainly hasn't taken away any love or fondness for Japan, as I say.
Speechless that you had that experience, Pam, but that you were able to come back from that. And we met you last year here in Beppu, doing amazing work between Auckland and Fukuoka. So tell us a little bit about what that is. What is this connection between where you are now, Auckland, and Fukuoka City?
Well, Fukuoka and Auckland are sister cities. So since 1986, and there's a lot of similarities, same population size or similar, 1.6, 1.7 million people, both port cities. So that's kind of how it started, I believe. On the anniversary of the 30 years, so around 2016, and given the mayor, I think Mayor Takashima maybe, really young guy, he was elected in 2010 as a 36-year-old, so quite progressive and very energetic. And he's been to Auckland a number of times. So 2010, he decided that Fukuoka should really become a startup city and embrace tech and all of those things. And it was his energy that when he came to Auckland, and I remember we hosted him at one of our startup hubs, he said, we need to partner on this side of how Fukuoka and Auckland could become more engaged. So we signed an MOU, the two mayors signed an MOU in 2017, and we have in Auckland here something we call Grid AKL, which is our startup community and network across the city. And so Grid AKL and the Fukuoka startup community have this partnership where we do some exchanges. And so an entrepreneur from Auckland will go over to their events and we encourage them to come back here. And it's a really lovely partnership. Ironically, we both operate out of historic business, buildings and have very similar programs and the like. I've sent a number of my team over the years, and so I was thrilled to be able to go myself last year and actually see it and feel it. And they had a startup competition on one day just for 5 countries that they'd invited. Finland has been really active in Japan in the startup space. They're awesome what they're doing. So they had a really strong connection there, and the other countries were from Southeast Asia and ourselves. And then there was a much bigger startup event the following day for the city. So Fukuoka is, that's going really, really nicely and well. There's a lot more we could do. From our end, our Auckland end, we're a bit constrained in terms of how much resource we've got to be able to engage, but it's fair to say we've got a great partnership with them. And actually the CE of Fukuoka City was just here the week before last. There's a beautiful friendship garden next to the zoo. So the chief executive came over and there was a tree planting, and we took this chief executive down to Grid AKL and take any opportunity we can just to engage with Fukuoka and keep those ties happening there. James Penn, some of you may know James. James is based in Fukuoka. I got to catch up with him while I was there last year. So, yeah, I think there's ongoing intent to do more with Fukuoka, but also Tokyo. Tokyo has really embraced tech, and there's some exciting things happening with Tokyo and startups.
Well, it's so good to have that context. I didn't realize it came from the young mayor who had these ideas and aspirations for Fukuoka, and they're obviously very well known now as a startup city. I think Sendai tries to compete with them and says they are the startup city. But I know that there's Alicia Staples from Staples VR, who we hope to have on the show at one point. But was she one of the interns or one of the people who exchanged between the two cities? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Catherine. So Alicia is a wonderful entrepreneur, Alicia Staples, VR Staples. So I've known her for many years. She's won the Young Tech Entrepreneur of the Year a couple of times here in New Zealand. We partner with her on a co-working space for creative tech. So she's invested in that. She's very community-minded as well as being a wonderful entrepreneur. So we suggested to Alicia that she is the entrepreneur that would be the 2022 exchange. And so she came up at the same time as I did, and she pitched on both days her business. She made some really great connections. She got introduced to people, and that's how businesses have to, start in Japan, making those connections, attending events, learning how business is done. And then obviously she spoke at the Japan New Zealand Business Council meeting this year, and I think it just ignited a whole new market for her. But certainly she's a fantastic entrepreneur, and yes, she'd be a great person to
she's
understand.
fantastic. And I think the Tech and Innovation plenary session that she was part of was probably the best one of the whole sessions. Yeah. And at that time, I was actually sitting next to your colleague, and we had a great, just conversing while we were listening to her and all the other team members. It was really fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. Are there other examples of successful Auckland, Fukuoka exchanges with this tech startup?
So interesting, one of the companies that is based in our co-working space down at Grid AKL is a company called Anew. And what they make is reusable water bottles made of plastic-based material. So it's a real circular economy example. So once the bottle is no longer used and it goes into landfill, it decomposes over time. But in the meantime, you have this beautiful, light blue colour too. I think it's jade from that company went up this year. So each year we try to get an interesting company to go up. But certainly we'd like to do a lot more in the future and take more people up, and we'll see how we go.
So what are you seeing as some of the trends or opportunities coming for New Zealand businesses wanting to do more with Japan?
Well, as we know, traditionally our exports to Japan have been largely food-based, big on dairy, big on products there. But we're seeing tech now as a huge opportunity for New Zealand companies. And certainly it's the second largest export of New Zealand. Most of the tech exports go to North America and Europe and Australia. However, I'd love to see more tech exchange and more exports to Japan. Again, when I was over there in last year, I met with the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, and they certainly see tech as their future as well. And they've got this amazing program called Sushi, S, small u, small s, HI. So startup, high tech kind of. It's a good play on the word sushi. And they're being very active with bringing in a whole network of other cities, including right around the world. It's called GNet. So we're looking at how we could become part of that. So it's part of this, countries operate at a national level, and that's all fantastic. But equally, you can have very effective subnational relationships that help enable business and entrepreneurship. And so I'm really, really impressed at how Tokyo is embracing tech and startups, and they have a fantastic event which we're hoping to attend next May, which is, again, all startups bringing different countries. I was in Brisbane in October for what's called the Asia Pacific City Summit, and they were there. They had a stall and about 5 or 6 people, some of who myself and Fiona, my colleague, who was you met in Christchurch, we both knew different people there. So Tokyo is really getting out there and trying to improve access, not only for Japanese-based tech companies, but also other countries to come and base themselves in Japan. So I would watch the tech space over the next 10 years. We've all seen the rise of wine exports into Japan or other countries. And I think that tech is we're going to see more and more of that. And certainly we've had some great examples of Kiwis doing wonderful tech initiatives in Japan over the time, but I would love to see more of that. And maybe the Alicia Staples of the world can, lead the way.
Yeah. So is it people doing the tech? Is it the tech innovation products or services themselves, or is it a bit of both then?
Well, a bit of both, Catherine, but, people, entrepreneurs, creating products that they think can fit a market need. And our Kiwis have to look at markets that are big and have to go global from day one. So in Auckland, which is very much a tech capital, the tech companies here, if you combine them all, they employ more people offshore than they employ in Auckland. Yeah, so that shows you how tech companies have to be offshore right from the get-go. But they can have the ideas and germinate the ideas and develop them here, and then look to export and grow, scale, it's the terminology that they use, in exciting markets like Japan.
Wow. And I mean, Auckland obviously can be a leader. And I think that's where Tātaki in your name of your organization does mean leader. And I remember at the conference, you made that little joke about Tātaki means leader. It doesn't mean the same as a Japanese word, Tātaki, pounded meat or fish. And so what is leadership then between Japan and New Zealand, Auckland and Fukuoka, as you see it? What does that mean?
Well, just to riff off a bit more of that Tātaki word, Tātaki is the leader of the haka, and it's also the spearhead that's used in the battle. And we were gifted this name, and it takes a long time to be gifted a name. So there's a lot of thought gone into it. And for this organisation, really proud to have a name that reinforces the importance that we place on our role as that cultural and economic development leader for the region. I think with what it means for New Zealand and Japan, I think it's about being the catalyst to drive better connections with people, with businesses and community. But leaders, I think, I'm not in the geopolitical world. That's where our good friends at NZTE to navigate and deal with some of those big issues. And that's always been a very interesting or tricky, depending on your point of view, part of the world, that Asia-Pacific area, or now Indo-Pacific with South China Sea and all of the history that we've come from. But in terms of at a subnational level, leadership is all about how we can share more information, how we can do more exchanges, whether that's in science, research and innovation. I mean, you're aware of the work in aerospace that's happening now, and certainly at Beppu, we got insight into what is happening in that part of Japan, but also our good friends at University of Auckland and some of our biggest companies here in Auckland are involved in aerospace. So we go back to leadership about understanding what are the differences, what bring people together, how can we make progress, and in a business world, how can we bring those two worlds together and realise that leadership's about making a better future. We're all stewards for the future. And if we think about the All Blacks, for example, which is a great analogy, whenever we're talking about New Zealand and Japan, the coaches such as Graham Henry or many others talk about the jersey, and that All Blacks get to just be stewards of the jersey for the time that they're in it, that they are adding to the legacy of what it all means. And so, leadership to me is that stewardship. How do you make things better for the future generations, and how do we pave the way for more young people to be visiting Japan, for example, in a very practical sense? And one of my team here, Kiriana Kone, was just over with the young group that went with Tony Boat and co, and has come back just buzzing, and just her worldview has just opened up, and it just makes me smile thinking about she's now got this amazing opportunity to take up. How can she get more involved with Japan? How can she bring her multiculture and do more connecting with Japan? I mean, it's just wonderful. And it's just wonderful to have Tātaki as the name of your organisation. I mean, wow.
Yeah, I just had shivers while you were telling me that, Pam. Thank you. So I just had this thought pop into my mind. It was like, so Pam, if you were going to be starting up a startup just now, what would you do? With all of your information that you know and all of these connections and things, what would you do?
Well, they say do what you love, don't they? When we met and you told me how you'd started your podcast, not this one, your other one, I was like, wow, that's so cool. You created a business out of something that you loved and was really relevant for what you were doing. I love tennis and baseball and golf. I love sport. So I think I'd like to do something that combines sport, maybe travel, and people. It'd be something in that services space. And I guess given it's a tech world, it'll have to have a tech element. But yeah, maybe it's some sporting travel business.
What a travel business. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then how can we connect it to Japan? Yeah, but
Oh, I mean,
yeah, yeah. How would we?
golf and baseball being really big in Japan and rugby,
Exactly.
obviously. I think there's something there.
There we go. I
There's
think we
some
might have just come up
business.
with a new business idea, Pam. Golfing exchanges between Japan and New Zealand or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it was really big in the 80s. And, we've got amazing golf courses here. And, it's a huge industry in Japan, isn't it? If you're in that elite kind of bracket.
Thinking back to your time when you were here just last year, what did you see then, say, compared to when you were first here, that stuck out to you? And, what did you find was really different about the way of communicating, I suppose, from back then to when we were there together, staying in the hotel, going around the sites as we did together? What sticks out as a sort of good way of communicating between the two cultures?
Well, I've got to say, and you mentioned it before, Jane, but I had a little red dictionary when I was there, all those years ago. Whereas this time we were just looking at our phones, or I was, or relying on Jayne or Catherine to translate. So using technology to be able to make an effort to communicate, I think, was a big difference, and probably the most major one. Took a lot of anxiety out of traveling around as well and finding my way around train stations and the like. I guess I was immediately transported back to that feeling of how welcoming the Japanese people are and friendly, and how much it's such a joy to discover every minute of the day something new, because the culture is so different. And I have to say, though, that I have not been able to get my head around onsen. That was a bit of a failing. We had such a good opportunity at that hotel we were staying at too. But that's a cultural thing I haven't been able to get my head around yet.
Yeah, we didn't see you down at the onsen. I think
No, we did
Jane and I were
not.
the only ones there, and we had it all to ourselves. But we did want everyone to come on down. But it's a little tricky, isn't it, to get your head around?
It's just a lack of practice, isn't it? You just need to practice
Yeah.
a bit more, and then you get it. And then you start to understand, oh, I like this one because of the water temperature, or oh, I didn't enjoy that one. It was whatever. You start to get a preference and things. It just takes time. I hated onsens for the first 5 years, probably. Right? How
Right.
about you, Catherine? Did you
Oh,
love them
same. I
straight
didn't
away?
like them,
Yeah.
and then once
No.
you like them, and you just can't wait to find out where the next place is where there's an onsen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just practice. Yeah.
And I guess too, Pam, your one piece of advice you would have then from all of this experience, like from that tough time back in your 20s to your recent experience, maybe there's something that sticks out for you as your, what we like to ask, the one gem of advice for people who might be dealing between New Zealand and Japan in business.
Well, I guess similar to the onsen kind of metaphor, my one piece of advice would really be just to soak it all up, totally embrace and love where you are and what it is, and just be with everything that happens around you, and be curious and welcoming of everything that is in front of you, rather than questioning and being defensive or any of those sorts of things. It is such an incredible culture. I think it's just being very open and trying to understand as much as you can, and knowing that will take a lot of time. Certainly if you're in business and you're wanting to export in Japan, I would be saying, visit properly. Go there as a visitor, not just a business person, and go and experience what it is like to travel, to live, and rather than being transactional around a business. I think, both of you have been there over 20 years. You're probably still learning things every day also. And recognizing that if you're committing to Japan, you're committing for 10, 20 years. And you see that with some of the people in Japan, New Zealand Business Council. They are so good at what they do because they've dedicated their careers to Japan and to be continually learning. And I think it's very important with another culture to give it that respect, to take time to soak it in and to really try and understand as much as you can.
And one more question I have is, what is something you've observed that Japan does really well?
Oh, it's a good question, Jane. I think resilience comes to mind, and particularly the example of 2011, which I know was a very tough year for you. So we had Christchurch and then we had Fukushima. Actually, I was booked to go up to Japan on holiday the Monday after the Friday of the
Oh my
tsunami,
goodness.
which consequently, obviously, I didn't.
Mm.
But that aside, I think the resilience of the Japan government, society, communities in rebuilding has been incredibly amazing to watch. And I compare that to how we respond to natural disasters, whether it's Christchurch 2011 or Kaikoura in 2013. We take a very long time to do things. And I think time and time over history, I'm reading this great book, The Short History of Japan. Time after time, Japan has shown that resilience to come back from disaster or threat and get on with life. Really says something about the Japanese people.
Yes, I'll definitely say that was something I also noticed, observed, and was impressed by. Just even, no matter how messed up or broken or contaminated things were here, they just got on with it and they tidied it up. And 12 years on, and most of it's tidied up now. Most of it's better than before, even.
Yeah, incredible.
Well, Pam, it's been fabulous to talk with you once again. We want to congratulate you on being a successful Jandal in Japan. We're going to call you a Jandal.
Yay!
Yay!
Wow,
You get to be a Jandal too.
That's an honor. It's
It is. It is really, right? And thank you so
Yeah.
much for telling us your story, being very vulnerable, telling us that earlier story there, and really sharing all your tips for success in this land of the rising sun. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you both. A big shout out to both of you. I think Jandals is a fantastic podcast, and you're doing what I was talking about. Connecting people and making it easier. So big ups to both of you. I think you're wonderful.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Pam. Wow, some major downloads there from Pam.
Interesting, right? Just the change of era, I suppose, from that big story she told us to today. But keeping face is coming up for me now as I think about it, and respecting the rules, but also not really knowing that it was going to be that bad once, what happened with her. I think she'd also been told by her friend that it would be all okay if she just apologized, and then just turned into something else. But what a lesson to have early in life. Wow.
Yeah, that was pretty rough. Maybe the same thing wouldn't necessarily happen today, Gendai Japan, in today's Japan. Things have moved on a little bit, but it is an interesting story in how you are representing something at all hours of the day. It's another aspect of that, right? When you become a member of a company or something, your conduct outside of work does affect your work, even if you're not actually working at the time. So just a good thing to keep in mind. But Pam didn't let that stop her from going on and doing amazing things. And
that's this good thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it? Didn't let one incident that was quite a big one turn her against Japan, and she's kept as a stronghold and, a real fan of Japan since then, and everything she's doing. It's amazing.
fantastic.
That could have turned me away, but well done, Pam.
Yeah.
And then,
Awesome.
taking this Auckland to be such a tech capital of New Zealand, I hadn't realised the whole story. So that was very enlightening.
Well, I thought Westport was the tech capital of New Zealand because
they make good gin, don't they? But
nearby they do.
Nearby. But I think that idea of having tech as a great export, I didn't realise it was also second in New Zealand, right? As our biggest export. That is fantastic. And let's bring that on even bigger and better. And, I think that was a wonderful outcome from what Pam talked about.
Yeah, I'm thinking, how can I start up a golf, baseball, travel startup between Japan and New
You
Zealand.
can do it. If anyone
Tokyo
can, you can.
and Auckland and
Yeah.
Fukuoka, all these
Yeah.
cities looking to work together. So yeah, if you're listening and you're the startup person, perhaps there's something there that you can use to help boost your startup as you go along in your startup journey. Who knew?
Absolutely. Wow, that was great. So we'll see everybody again soon,
Yeah.
Jayne, correct?
Yes. See you again soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening. Make sure you check out our guests' links in the show notes.
This podcast is brought to you today by Catherine O'Connell Law and PodLaunch with Jayne. If you have a great story you think should be on the show, come and find us on LinkedIn or Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. See you next time.
Mata ne!